Bitcoin is not the volatile asset. Bitcoin is only volatile when you price it in dollars.
Volatility is always solved with time. If we give the asset time, we know that we're going to be able to deal with that.
We know how much Bitcoin there is. There is 21 million hard cap. That's all that there'll ever be.
The beauty of every piece of Bitcoin or every Satoshi is that in the real estate analogy, it is all beachfront property. When I was 12, I got to learn the hard way what financial devastation feels like. The interest rates on business loans at that particular time were around 21 or 22%. Be the boss of your money. Everyone has the opportunity, and I think probably the obligation, to be their own CFO, their own chief financial officer.
All right, today I'm delighted to have with me Mr. Sloan Wilkins. Sloan is a financial coach. He's spent decades inside the financial system and banking, and now he is really moving into this space of decentralized finance and really helping people to, I guess, exit the system, which is such an important thing to talk about right now. And so I'm really delighted to have this chat with you, Sloan, and welcome, mate. How's things on your end?
Great to be here. We are literally just down the road from each other. I'm in Brisbane, you're down the coast, so we're not too far removed, and the weather is beautiful here after some rainy weather earlier in the week. It's lovely.
Yeah. Now, we had a bit of a sprinkle yesterday, but nice and hot today. Summer is here, mate. Absolutely no doubt about it. Now, mate, we want to cover a lot of ground today. Obviously, you're a financial coach. I want to be a little bit careful on how I qualify that because
Yes.
Some people might be thinking, financial planner, financial coach. So I'll get you to elaborate on that shortly. But before we get into your story, maybe some of the root causes that you see in people's lives that are causing them financial stress right now, how this dovetails into Bitcoin and all of that. Before we get into that, what I'd love to know is just how you're feeling right now about the state of the market in general and kind of where you see Bitcoin, and do you feel like there's a little trepidation out there in people's minds about getting involved in Bitcoin and all of that right now?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting time, and I think the last month has been quite instructive in the world of Bitcoin. We've gone from all-time highs to literally overnight or early today, our time, dipping back below that magical US $100,000 mark briefly, and it's continuing to jump around. So I think how people are feeling in that regard depends on their level of conviction, maybe depends on the time frame they associate with their view, and also how long they've been inside Bitcoin and what their journey's been so far. So for me, a couple of days ago, I was literally purchasing more, thinking I was doing well at about 105, 106. And turns out a day or two later, I could have done even better. But that's okay, because I think really to be able to consistently purchase is the way to go. And we'll probably talk about dollar cost averaging a bit later, but I don't know that there's a whole lot to panic about. Definitely, I think if you're in the share market, you might be concerned because that has been also the subject of some movement and it's been toppy for quite some time. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think the things that I've heard definitely in the last couple of days has been interest rates. A lot of people concerned as to what may happen there, with both the Fed and the RBA indicating that the next move may not be downwards. It could, in fact, be upwards. Hopefully there's a long gap between where we are today and that happening, because it definitely caused so much stress and so much concern, particularly in Australia, the last time we had that huge run up with interest rates. That's pretty much where my head is at the moment, is looking beyond the horizon to the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that's a great summary. And I just want to touch on that point a little further, mate, about, buying Bitcoin and then the next day or the next week following, because we've all been there. I know that when I first started into Bitcoin, a lot of my listeners know that, I was allocating to Bitcoin and then within the space of, I think, a week to 2 weeks, the price had dropped by 20-25%. This is going back a few years now, but, for the uninitiated, that can be very disconcerting. So how do you feel right now? Like when you've hit the buy button and then a day later, you're down, I don't know, 5, 6, 7%. Do you think of it in fiat dollar terms, or are you thinking more long term and more in terms of how much you've got in terms of stack Bitcoin, and whether or not, hey, might be an opportunity for me to actually buy more if you've got some loose change? How do you see it?
Yeah, look, I lean into it, I guess, if it's I try not to do too much out of my standard cycle anyway, which is increasingly a weekly transaction. So, but it makes me look at, and I quite often look on the time chain analysis at how many sats per dollar we're getting at the moment. And in one way, it's exciting to see that moving upwards, or sorry, seeing the overall price moving upwards in fiat terms. In other ways, that pulls the sats per dollar down. So that's a little bit discouraging sometimes, because when I look at that, I actually look at a sat and I think of it as a dollar, because
Mm.
that's not what it's going to be today. Who knows what the next 5 years might bring, but definitely longer term, that's where it's going. So if you asked anyone, I'll trade you a dollar for 900 future dollars or somewhere thereabouts, that's a deal you'd take every day of the week. And provided that you are looking over that time frame and not dealing with money you need for the here and now or the next 6 or 12 months even, that's a pretty good opportunity that can't be ignored.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There was actually, just to elaborate on that a little too, mate. I did a video today on my channel. I'm not sure whether you've seen it yet, but I spoke about, how people make the mistake, and it's a logical mistake to make, of pricing Bitcoin in dollars, right? Now, people might say, oh, you're crazy, Zane, for saying that, because that's what we need to utilize in order to buy it. But the thing is, once you kind of cross that mental hurdle of realizing that, as Sloan said, the future for Bitcoin is one where we see a world where we're going to actually be transacting in Satoshis, fractions of a Bitcoin. And so, the thing to understand is that Bitcoin is not the volatile asset. Bitcoin is only volatile when you price it in dollars. We know how much Bitcoin there is. There is 21 million hard cap. That's all that there'll ever be. And we can verify that for ourselves under the hood when it comes to Bitcoin. And if you compare that to the dollar system, right, where we have no idea how much there is in circulation today, tomorrow, next year, it just helps you to kind of rationalize a world where we're moving from this inflationary, volatile currency, right, where we can't really pinpoint the price of anything, where it's quite clear that price does not equal value, and we can see that in housing, and we're transitioning, right, into this stable monetary protocol, of which there's only ever going to be 21 million macro units available. And the world's going to
Yes.
be using as a settlement layer to exchange and to measure value. So it's a bit of a mindset shift. And I know you talk a lot about mindset when it comes to people's personal finances, Sloan, but
Yes.
yeah, I just think on Bitcoin, it's really important to understand that it's kind of it's kind of a lost cause continuing to get hung up on the Aussie dollar price or the US dollar price, when over the course of history, yes, it's volatile when priced in dollars, but if you look at a Bitcoin price chart since January 2009, it looks like that, right?
Yep.
Which is essentially up and to the right forever, with volatility along the way. But what I'd love to do is for you to just share with my audience kind of how you came to find Bitcoin. If you spent 3 decades in the traditional financial system, most people in your shoes, particularly if they've been in it professionally, they've got a tough time seeing anything outside of that. So what is it that really piqued your interest with Bitcoin, and why are you here?
Yeah, look, I think that was me too. I
Mm.
was also blind to the opportunity for more years than I care to admit. I certainly had an awareness of it. I wouldn't be able to put exactly my finger on the year that I became aware of it.
Mm.
However, pre-pandemic, I can definitely remember having some conversations with some colleagues that weren't directly in my part of a broader business, but they worked in other parts, marketing or communications, etc., who were raising the opportunity that existed with Bitcoin. And I'm afraid or ashamed to admit that my head was very much still in the traditional portfolio model frame of mind at that stage. And I wouldn't say that I dismissed it out of hand. I just sort of said, make sure you do your homework and look into it, because I didn't know enough either way. It wasn't something in the wealth management side of the world that we could deal with, and that's still the case for for all financial advisors. They may have a personal interest, but from a client perspective, it's not something that typically enters the conversation other than maybe noting down that they have a holding. It just can't be included in the portfolio. So, yeah, I don't think I'm a unique individual when it comes to that regard, having come from the background I've come with. It is definitely a bit of a mind bender to extract yourself from, in my case, a lot of education and around portfolio construction and the asset classes, etc., to suddenly realize, well, here is a brand new asset class, and to also understand, well, why does it exist? What is the problem it's trying to solve? It's not just magical internet money. There's a real reason why this has been created. And once you are heading down that rabbit hole, it really becomes almost unavoidable that you end up deeply believing in the opportunity that is there. And I don't mean investment opportunity, I mean the opportunity to secure your future when it comes to securing the value of effectively your time and energy that you've placed into the world to earn the income. That cannot be stored safely in any other way. Volatility is always solved with time. If we give the asset time, we know that we're going to be able to deal with that. And the trade is only going to get worse from here, insofar as the fiat currency that we'll be exchanging is going to continue to degrade in value. So therefore it will buy us less in Bitcoin each and every passing year, with some fluctuations along the way. So I don't mean that anyone's missed it. Definitely we're still early, but people need to be paying attention to this. That's how I feel about it. And I feel uncomfortable sometimes in conversations where I think back and realize, gee, that could have been really valuable for me to talk about with a friend or a family member in the past, but I wasn't there. And I guess I feel like, Bitcoin came to me, and then I went willingly down the rabbit hole to learn more with a curious nature. So that's the way you got to approach it.
And was there a moment that you recall, Sloan, where, Bitcoin found you? Like, was there a particular moment? Was somebody kind of putting in front of you, or was it just a general curiosity that you had?
Yeah, look, there's a few key conversations that I can remember. Ironically, I use YouTube a lot. I hadn't found it on YouTube until I started particularly seeking out more information. And then, of course, the algorithm doesn't work. But in the real world, I'd had conversations with people involved with various brokerages, exchanges that were sort of in business development roles involving crypto as the broad asset class, not the pristine collateral that Bitcoin represents. So there was definitely the awareness there, and I knew that there was a whole lot of, pardon the French, shitcoin out there that I personally have invested and dabbled in a tiny amount of that, and that was really the early stages. If we go back several years, my son certainly had mining rigs set up in the house
Right.
with various currencies there. He's an IT guy. He's in his mid-20s now and was far earlier to the space than I was. So, I probably credit him for being an inspiration for me. And as a dad, I just wanted to jump in there and be involved. So, I was happy to fund half the cost and all of the electricity to drive that interest so that we had something to engage with, or something additional to engage over. And it was a really good education for me.
So that kind of inspired you to look a bit deeper, and I guess as your curiosity kind of gets the better of you, you start just noticing content, don't you? And then that leads to another thing, and before you know where you are, you're on the verge of being orange pilled.
Reading books, reading the white paper.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't look like the most exciting document, but it actually is once you get underneath the layers there and understand what it truly represents. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Mate, before we get into some of the things that you learn in your professional space, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners would get a lot of value from kind of that mindset and that place where people come from in their financial lives. Why would they come to somebody like you? I think there's a lot of insight that you could share there. But before we touch on that, I'd love for you to just share with us the difference between how you position yourself as say a financial coach as opposed to like a traditional financial planner?
Yeah, it's an important distinction, and I think both have value. Look, I come from that world. I've held financial planning qualifications, and I guess since I left corporate world in 2021, I've set those to the side. So, and the big distinction for me, or there's a few, is not stepping into that personal advice space where
Mm.
it is really, hey, this is 100% the right recommendation for you. It is about helping people find their way within the information that's relevant for them. And that can be driven by facts, which are enormously helpful, like how systems work, what contribution rules are as examples. But it also allows us to make sure that the individual is deeply involved rather than being the recipient of advice. They are very much in the driver's seat. And one of my favorite sayings is be the boss of your money. Everyone has the opportunity, and I think probably the obligation to be their own CFO, their own chief financial officer, whether they're leading themselves or whether they are with their partner leading the family into the future. It's an area that we don't always set aside time to think through with finances, but we should. And another big difference as well is I don't sell any products at all. So products they have their place. Like we do need certain things, like superannuation's a good example there. We're required to have it, and B, for lots of people who are transitioning and taking more control and more interest in their superannuation assets, that structure and the self-managed super fund approach can be a really good way that they can take more control and have a greater pool of capital to work with. So I'm very aware of the structures and the various asset classes and how they work. So education around them is incredible, but I stop short of saying, here's a product that's for you, and this is why. It's walking alongside people and helping them, most importantly, make sure their behaviours are lining up with where they want to go, because sometimes that's a bit of a challenge for us as humans. We're not necessarily
Mm.
wired to be great savers or to be great investors.
Yeah, so it's all about being self-responsible, being accountable for
Mm,
your own financial life. And I really
absolutely.
like that. I mean, I think the same can be said for our education. I think the same can be said for our health, how we manage many different aspects of our lives. And I think if you kind of look around in your own social circle, you always find people who have taken that ownership in their life in any particular area that's important. They tend to always be the ones that are kind of thriving a little better than most. So, I'm a real fan of being proactive, and I think Bitcoin gives us that opportunity to be seriously proactive with our money, kind of like no other asset we've ever seen. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I definitely would. And with both of the points that you were just raising there, like anytime that we feel like we've got more control, and not from the sense of, hoarding all the control for ourselves, but we are happening to our lives is maybe a better way of saying that.
Mm,
That delivers a lot of satisfaction for
mm,
people. It's not necessarily even from the financial side, how much money we stack up. And, in what I do, I can help anyone with their habits and the right thought processes to stack up more money. That's good, but money only has value in the context of human endeavor, the things that we care about.
mm.
And it's those things, those big high level goals that actually mean something to us and mind. That's where a lot of satisfaction comes from, when we can see we're making progress towards those, not hitting a particular number go up is less important, I think, in the context of Bitcoin than freedom go up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to dive more into that as we go along here, mate. But what I'd love to do is just kind of get into some of the things that you see and hear in your profession. And maybe a good place to start for the benefit of myself and the audience is, what would you say for most people is the root of money stress? What is the main thing that you think really is a challenge for most people to overcome financially in their lives?
Yeah, look, it's combination, and I think these are number one or number two or equal first, of being time poor or not allocating time to it, and lack of clarity. So when you have both of those things, it's a real double whammy, which is true for many of the professional people and business owners that I work with regularly. Is they are time poor because they're busy being successful. But it means the conversations haven't happened. And that also feeds into that lack of clarity about, where are we going? What are we doing? What comes next? What should we be thinking about? How do we spot the opportunities? All of those things are very relevant for us to have a conversation either with ourselves, with an external party to help us sort of have a sounding board, or with our partner so that we get close to being on the same page as we possibly can. That's the two key factors there for sure, is that lack of
Mm.
clarity as well as the capacity to set aside some time to actually devote to this in the same way that we might, not necessarily as a hobby. I personally think that spreadsheets are fun, but I'm a little strange like that. But it is important to devote that time.
And so is that what you're saying, Sloan, is the main, I guess, reason why people come to somebody like you, mate, is because they maybe they even earn good money, right? And they're just not feeling like they're getting ahead. They're feeling like they could be doing better. Maybe they
Yeah.
have a lack of structure in how they're managing their money. Is that the main stuff they need help with? Just that clarity around, okay, you bring in this much money every single week, every single month, or your business is performing at this level. Maybe they don't have time to dedicate to this. They just need somebody to kind of guide them and set things up in a really, I guess, progressive way for their future. Is that kind of where it's at?
Yeah, look, that's a big part of it. And whilst we just talked about the root causes being not enough time and not enough clarity, how that
Mm.
normally shows up
Yeah.
is a little bit what you've spoken to. It normally shows up as a sense of frustration, first and foremost.
Mm.
And most of the people I'm working with, they do have quite strong incomes.
Right.
In some cases, seven-figure incomes on an annual basis, which doesn't mean that they're in financial distress, but they're definitely in financial frustration because
Right.
they can see our earnings are good. So therefore, we feel like we should be at X point on our journey. And if there's a gap between where they are today and that imagined point where they would like to be, that leads to frustration because, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to go about it? What are the options? And it feels like there's many, many different approaches out there. So it can feel like almost trying to find your way through some sort of financial fog where
Right.
all the options are floating around you, but which one's right for us? And what should we be thinking about in what order? And all of those points there really come to the fruition when we really come to a point of conversation so that we can bring them to fruition is what I meant to say, by having some dedicated time and some constructive conversations. A lot of times, like a big question I ask people is, tell me the story of money growing up in your house.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see the answers and particularly to see the different answers sometimes within a couple. And even if their experiences have been very different or identical, you can still see people operating in very different ways than their partner. And that is actually a little bit of a superpower because it brings different perspectives. But the way that we have grown up around money really shapes some of our beliefs, which leads into our behaviors and action or inaction with finances. So yeah, it's a fascinating thing because the views that we have about ourselves, our capacity to earn, whether we are savers, whether we feel like we can absorb new financial information and make something out of that and make sense of it, what we
Mm.
believe about ourselves can be one of the greatest inhibitors, and it's largely made by our own mind, in truth, and we can overcome that. So it's good to
Yeah.
surface those sort of things there. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure I've
No,
answered
that's
your
okay, mate.
question.
No, you have. I think mindset is kind of what you're alluding to there, how important it is that you kind of create that clearing for yourself where you can set up in a rational form just some clarity by working with somebody who can maybe see things that you can't see, can structure things out in a simple format that you can follow and maybe see that there's an end game there that you can get to if you follow a certain path. I think all of those things are really helpful, particularly in this day and age where people tend to be busier than ever. There's a lot going on in people's lives. There's a lot of
Yeah.
anxiety and stress and uncertainty out there. And that's why I think that, just working with somebody to help kind of take what's sort of here and maybe feeling a little overwhelming into a nice tight channel that you can work with is a really powerful thing. What I'd love to, sorry,
I
go
was just
ahead.
going I was just going to say, sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees. We're
Mm,
a little bit too close to it. And an analogy that I love around coaching is it's really hard to read the label while you're inside the jar.
Yeah, right.
And so to have
That's a
that,
goodie.
yeah, that have that third party there with you, and in coaching, the simplest definition I can give of it is that it helps us accelerate our progress.
Yeah.
Whether it's, a golf coach that's going to spot some issues with our swing. I'm not a golfer, and I'd probably give some poor golf coach a heart attack if I tried to be.
So we won't come to you for golf coaching, Sloan.
No, I live in a very nice part of the world on a golf course, but it's not. I see the people enjoying themselves, and I'm glad for them. It's
Yeah,
just not
yeah.
my thing. Yeah, like any point of life, all the answers are out there. I think we are one Google search away from having all the information or all the possible solutions that we might be able to apply to ourselves for any aspect of life. But do we have the time, and do we have the objectivity to be able to observe that and then review it
Mm,
through the context of where we are personally? The answer
yeah.
is often no, we don't have the time. And maybe if we can fast track by leaning on someone, and your Bitcoin success circle is a really good example of that. The information is excellent. It's really well presented and people get a lot of value from it. Could we source that information at the local library? Some of it, yes. Some of it, no. But we could do the work. The reason people a part of that, I think at least, is they want a sense of community and they
Mm,
want to be able to progress their journey faster than they would otherwise. And they're making a commitment to themselves. So it's the same sort
yeah.
of concept.
Yeah. And that's a big part of coaching, isn't it? It's just having that somebody there that can hold you accountable, give you some steps, clear pathway, and then having
Yeah.
that ongoing accountability and connection is really important. What I want to do, mate, in a moment here is just change gears and really talk about how Bitcoin really dovetails into all of this, because I know that you've taken this concept of coaching and helping people in their financial lives inside this system, which is where most
Mm.
people are, and now you're starting to kind of help people and guide them into a direction where they can start apportioning a part of their financial life into this, as we call it, a life raft situation, this external, detached separation environment that we call Bitcoin. And I want to get into that. But before we do that, what I'd love to just have you share, if you don't mind, Sloan, is just a little about your backstory, because I'm pretty sure inside the Bitcoin Success Circle, you were one of the first people to join. And I'm quite sure early in the days there, you were quite open about the impact that your childhood had on
Mm.
the way you see money and your money story. Do you want to just share a little about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Money was not something I remember being discussed a lot when I was
Mm,
in particularly my single digit years. It is hard to remember. I'm the other side of 50 now. And I don't remember money ever being a problem until it was.
mm,
And for our family, when I was 12, I got to learn the hard way what financial devastation feels like. So this is 86, I want to say. So the interest rates on business loans at that particular time were around 21 or 22% is what my mum and dad were paying in their business. And inflation was also running in the high teens at that point there as well. So this is before the time when the Reserve Bank actually had an inflation target. That didn't commence until the early 90s, and probably in response to what happened in the late 80s. For those of us around, and there's plenty of younger people, and that's maybe anyone sort of under early 30s who won't have memory of what that time was like and
mm,
how challenging it was. So we had the longest in uninterrupted period of economic growth, I think globally there at one stage, stretching to 25 or 26 years. So really we did fantastic, and there's a reason we're called the lucky country. But yes, mum and dad had a business. They had they had borrowings. It was going well. They expanded and built another premises and another one besides that as well for a commercial lease. And the interest rates simply overtook them, as well as it did many other business people in town, and a few other factors there as well. But the end result being that they proactively had to realise that this was unrecoverable and they made the decision to enter bankruptcy. And so alongside losing their business, we also lost our family home and went from having, as I said, quite a nice life to not a quite nice life. And a few years later after that, we also lost the family unit. Mum and Dad's marriage did not survive that. And the impacts that I guess I realised in later years that financial stress has on us is, individual mental health, the quality of relationships between partners, spilling out to the family and even to the community there. Financial stress or financial arguments is one of the biggest causes of relationship breakdown and marriage breakdown as well. It's always top one or two there. And so it is one of those things where I didn't understand at the time what on earth was going on, only that we had to move from one location to another. And I can remember that vividly. It was really powerful. But over time, I got more and more interested in finance really from that point on. So just consuming everything I could read, I guess I was trying to understand and also work myself into a position where I could avoid that happening to me. So the impact was massive on the direction of my life. And I found myself really pushing through my teenage years into my early career. And I did go into banking. I'm not sure how Mum and Dad felt about that. Fortunately, it wasn't the bank that was involved with their
the very institution that sent them to the wall. Yeah.
No, it wasn't that one, thankfully. That probably would have been a tough conversation. But it was a great opportunity for me. And, I just started working hard and bought my first investment property with my now wife when I was 20. I was doing some dumb things as well, don't get me wrong. I'd like to say I was one of those people who always got things right from the start, but that wasn't the case. I was doing some smart things, like consistently saving and investing and starting out on the property cycle. But I was also spending my strong income on, I guess, material items would be the best way to describe it, Zane. Yeah, and looking back, I really was trying to fill an emotional hole with external stuff, which never works. Or if it does, it only works for about 5 minutes per transaction, and then you're on to the next thing. But I can remember
so
at the time.
we're talking about flash cars or boats or something more sinister than that?
No, cars and technology at the time. If there was a new phone issued, I had to have it.
The latest and greatest.
Clothes. That was the time when I was sort of consistently wearing suits to work. So
right. Okay, you had to have the best suit.
All the outwards appearances to deal with the inner stuff.
Yeah.
I guess I wasn't smart enough to work that out just then, but eventually I did. So I stopped doing the dumb stuff. And I'm not labeling it dumb for anyone else, but it was just dumb for me, what I was doing. Very understandable, just not helpful. So that's the journey. And I realized more and more, gosh, this has such a big impact when people are stressed around finances. No one ever teaches us this. We don't learn this stuff in school, probably because we're maybe not supposed to. It's very good at churning out workers. I think that was the original design. It just hasn't changed over time to allow us to be sovereign individuals focused on how we can uplift our life and our family's life for the better. And everyone benefits when we do that. So it is a little disconnect in my mind while we don't help more people understand. But people with much bigger profiles than me have tried to change the education system to bring more into play around managing finances and haven't really succeeded other than on a small local scale. So that might tell us something, might tell us a few things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, mate, what I'd love to do is just dive into Bitcoin as a behavioral revolution. And I know that you believe that Bitcoin helps people shift from consumer to owner. Maybe you can explain a little what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I actually heard it on a podcast a while back, and I don't know who said it, but I did hear it again just the other day from actually Gary Cardone, who was doing a good job of explaining the concept and really how he's come into view or does view Bitcoin as a business. Like given the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin or the CAGR, it's pretty difficult to find a business that's going to outperform that over time. And also when you consider the fact that you need to put in, your capital goes in both sides, but we need to have additional costs and holding
insurance,
costs for running a business, all those sort of things there, which is, that's very expensive. So without all that stuff, It's the opportunity to actually own something, particularly if you're talking about self-custodying the asset. Is one of the few things that I think you can actually really own.
Mm,
Even the home that I'm sitting in or the home that you're sitting in, stop paying your rates for long enough and find out who owns your place. So
exactly. Yeah.
it's really interesting. We have this illusion of ownership in a few different areas, and that is all subject to risk. Fortunately, we haven't had to find out the hard way really in Australia. Uh,
Mm,
Certainly not in recent times, but there's plenty of examples overseas where that's been the case, where what someone thought was theirs this week, almost they wake up overnight in some cases, and it's no longer theirs, and it's no longer physically there at all. It's been taken or subsumed.
mm.
So that's what I sort of mean is instead of operating in the fiat world, which encourages us to be good little consumers and get out there and spend on marketing products, I suppose, that have been delivered to us. Marketers are fantastic at doing their job and communicating and creating needs for us. And some of those things are really relevant, and it's great to be informed. Other of those things we weren't on our radar, yet we find them bringing them home or ordering them in. That consuming beyond our needs is typically going to restrict our opportunity to grow on the other side and create a real asset base, which is ultimately what people who are wealthy spend their money on. They spend their money on assets, not on things or material items that will go down in value. So that's
Mm.
sort of the mindset that I think is useful to adopt. It's not saying don't spend any money. Although there's movements out there like that, which, no purchase months or no purchase years and things like that. That's cool if that's where you want to go. I think balance is important. We should spend not a single dollar more on things that we don't need, and we should spend maybe even lavishly on the things that actually add value to our life, and definitely think about the future that's coming
Yeah.
exorably for us. How do we get ahead of that? How do we position ourselves so that we're not the ones that get run over by it?
And I think for most people, Sloan, it really goes against the grain what you're saying, because in order to really adopt that, right, that long-term investor mentality, that wealth creation mentality, what it actually means is that you need to lower your time preference, right? And unfortunately, and we know that Bitcoin rewards that, right? Bitcoin rewards a low time preference. And for those of you who may not have heard that term, low time preference essentially just means to extend your time horizon. So you're here for the long game. And the challenge with that is we live in a society now, right, that has really been amplified through social media, where people feel like they need to keep up, right? They're comparing their life to the lives of other people, even subconsciously. And so we now, because we have this exposure to what everybody else is doing, there is always that inner voice that this compulsion to want to keep up, which basically means we need to stop focusing on the future, and we start sacrificing the future for the present. So instead of having a low time preference, we now have a high time preference, meaning we need that damn thing now. And it's such a simple principle if you think about it. I'm sure if you really studied the wealthiest people on earth, right, and I've done this through reading autobiographies and the like, but what you notice about these people who are the truly successful people who build long-term wealth is they are prepared to either put something on the line, right, invest today in order for a better outcome tomorrow, or they're prepared to sacrifice in sweat equity. So to work their ass off at something in the short term, knowing that if they just stay on path in the long term, they're going to prevail. And what Bitcoin really does, okay, in my mind, as a behavioral revolution, just to speak to that point, is it helps us to kind of reinstill these old values, right, that we once had, maybe that we grew up with. When our parents had businesses and they knew that the way forward was to build a business or to invest for the long term. And it meant some sacrifice, some risk, some capital allocation, and once upon a time, you could do that with a reasonable assurity that if you just stuck at it, you would be successful, right? But now, right, and this really speaks to the next few minutes, so I want to dovetail into this. this broken money system, right? Because the problem now is not just the challenges we face in terms of competition, regulation, all of that, but it's also the problem that we now have a hurdle rate when it comes to money. So we've also got to keep up with that. So whatever we do, and I think this kind of touches on what Gary Cardone was saying, what he's basically saying, a guy who's had umpteen successful businesses over many decades, he's basically saying now, if you bring me a business proposal, right, you better make sure that it's going to perform at better than 40 or 50% a year. Because if it doesn't, stuff that, I'm putting it into Bitcoin where I can sleep at night. I don't have the headaches of regulation and stuff and rents and the like. And it's a very, very legitimate perspective, I guess.
Yeah, totally agree.
So do you agree with that when it comes to the time preference thing? Is that how you see Bitcoin? And that how you coach it when you talk to people about it? It's all about lowering time preference?
Yeah, look, it's true for everything to do with our finances, even in the old system. Like, there's lots that we cannot control. We know that that's a broken system and where it's heading. Whilst ever we're in that, the thing that's common is, and sorry, where my mind just went briefly there, is it's really the power of our behaviours, which is about that time preference there. If we can delay that gratification, two things happen at least. One, we probably make better quality decisions about where we might spend those funds. Is it going to be in the acquisition of an asset, or is it going to be in the material items world? And two, we might find ourselves actually, if we introduce a little bit of time between the stimulus, seeing maybe the ad show up or something, and our response to that. The time is incredibly important there. And if we realize that, I think that's fundamentally, you can almost trace back financial distress to wanting the now over valuing the future, because we will make decisions with our health, with our activities, even with our friendship circle, our learning and our finances, that maybe don't serve us over time if we're too focused on enjoying life now. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying life. It's my question with clients, how they choose to spend or allocate money is always about calibration, not necessarily yes or no, but what is the right amount. And
Right.
particularly if someone's got, a spending challenge in a certain area, let's say shopping of one particular variety. Now, if that expenditure is $1,000 a month on something, what space does it create? What opportunities does it create if we bring that back to 400? Still probably way more than I would reasonably sort of say, but you need to transition carefully over time. And I think that's the best way of describing some of it, really, Zane, is that we've got to lift our eyes to the horizon. If we're too focused in on the pleasures of now or what our needs are now and ignoring the opportunity, we fail to prepare for the coming winter.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think it's, like I said, it's the toughest hurdle for people to overcome, just that realization that if they really want to build a robust financial future for themselves and their families, there is a little bit of sacrifice short term in order to get there for the long term. And I guess that's an ageless principle of wealth creation. It's always been there. It probably always will be there. But how would you say that Bitcoin can really help people now, Sloan, in terms of come to you, I'm earning X number of dollars a year, my partner, my wife, my spouse, they're bringing in Y dollars a year. This is our combined income. Here are all of our expenses. And you say to us, well, look, we could save here, we can save there, we can invest here, we can invest there. How does Bitcoin dovetail into this conversation, or does it?
It definitely does. And it fits in a few different ways. One is, like, I'm always talking about going granular, but then taking the 10,000 foot view. The granular is we zoom in so that we can zoom out later. We want to have a look at what's going on with spending on a month-to-month basis right now. Some of that will be good. Some of that will be problematic, and we want to adjust that. The 10,000 foot view becomes the reason that we are doing well with our finances on a monthly basis. It's in service of those bigger picture goals, not just financial goals, but how we want to live our life type of goals. So we'd be able to ultimately jump over that divide by taking care of our finances today in service of that. And where Bitcoin fits in is a couple of different ways, depending on how old you are and what you're trying to achieve. I think you would have heard, as I have, lots of commentary around younger people who are feeling frustrated that they, particularly in Australia, cannot access the housing market. It just feels like it's an impossibility for them. Well, Bitcoin is a savings technology that could give you the capacity to, at a later date, access property at a different way, because
Mm,
we can see, and I did the calculations on my own property, it's definitely going down in Bitcoin terms
mm,
quite considerably over the last 8 years that I've owned it. But in fiat terms, it's gone up by more than $1 million.
mm.
So it's really fascinating. So that's an opportunity there for those younger people. But I also think about the opportunity when it comes to accelerating non-deductible debt, such as our home loan, because the traditional method has been to throw extra amounts at our home loan, and that can be really productive. Like something as simple as taking a monthly payment, dividing it in two, and paying that each fortnight. If you have a fortnightly cash flow, that results in you paying one extra payment across the entire year. Yet on $1 million loan over 30 years, that will save you over 5 years and over $200,000 doing just that.
Right.
And so
Hmm.
that's money that will be in your pocket later on. The question I have in my mind, and I haven't back tested this yet, would be what happens with my home loan if I continue to pay the minimum I'm required to, yet take those extra amounts that I may have put into the home loan and in fact turn that around and distribute it towards an investment in Bitcoin, specifically for the purpose of later on retiring that debt with a lump sum as that asset has grown considerably over time.
Mm.
I suspect if I backtest that, it's going to be a pretty obvious outcome that that would be an efficient way of tackling it, as long
Yeah.
as people can get comfortable with the volatility. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. No, I think, and I guess this kind of ties into Bitcoin-backed mortgages, which we know are coming. I mean, we know that People's Reserve, headed up by CJ Konstantinos. For those of you who want to check out what CJ is doing, he's a phenomenal guy, hardcore Bitcoiner, and the People's Reserve is what it's called, and they're pioneering Bitcoin-backed mortgages. And I realize you're not talking about that specifically, Sloan, but it
Yep.
really speaks to the power of Bitcoin as a tool to help you accelerate or pay down the debt on your home a lot quicker. And even in a traditional mortgage like we have here, I think what you're saying is that if you were to traditionally add an extra, instead of paying monthly, you pay fortnightly, and then over the course of the year, that would equate to an extra payment per year, which would equate to, over the longest time, savings at the back end in terms of
Yes.
how many years it is that you're tied to the loan. Brilliant. But I would venture to say, and again, I haven't done the numbers on this either, but we do know that people who are pricing homes in Bitcoin, when you start pricing anything that you live in, where it be it a rental property that somebody else owns or a home that you own, you do notice that over the last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, that the price of that property in Bitcoin terms is actually going down, not up. And so anything that we allocate to Bitcoin at the expense of a mortgage or our repayment on our home definitely is going to help accelerate your way to being debt free quicker than it otherwise would, basically based on Bitcoin's historical compound growth rate,
Mm.
and there's lots of reasons why that's happening, not the least of which is that it's the only monetary system we've ever had that is the hardest form of money, because it's fixed and it's finite and they can't make any more of it. So we deploy capital into it. What happens? The value of it grows exponentially faster than anything else.
Yeah, I've got to admit that that was one of the things that really attracted me in the first instance. Is once I got it, and we see so few examples, and in fact, it's really difficult to think of another one, of absolute scarcity in our
Mm,
world, that it's hard to get your head around what that actually means. But the closest thing we've probably got is gold. And I sort of start using that explanation when I'm talking to people, well, why is gold valuable? Well, it looks nice. You can do lots of things with it. It's has a utility value, and you don't trip over it when you're walking down the street. It's actually a little bit hard to get. So it's that scarcity value. And same when you talk about things like black opal. My father was a gem miner as a hobby, and I can remember a black opal ring that he had. It's not something you find every day. And so when you do get something that's special, it's more valuable. But when you put an absolute limit on it in terms of mathematics and cryptology, then you know you've got something pretty special, and there's no way with the monetary system that can be debased.
Yeah, and I guess that's why beachfront real estate performs better than everything else, right? It's the same thing, or harbourfront, those kinds of things, because it's this reality that scarcity drives value. Scarcity drives value. The more scarce something is, if there's demand for it, then it's going to increase in value, I guess, more substantially than things that are less scarce. Bitcoin being the most scarce form of money we've ever seen, is the fastest horse in the race, because it is the most scarce. It's really as simple as that. And Bitcoin has utility value as a store of value, as a medium of exchange. And many believe that it's going to transition into also a unit of account where we will be utilizing it globally at a government level, an institution level, corporate level, and an individual level as a settlement layer, right? It'll be the only trustless form of money, right? Where we can all say, you know what? The fact that nobody controls this thing is a really good thing, because we can store our value in it knowing that nobody can come along and change the rules or stuff with it.
I was going to say, the beauty of every piece of Bitcoin or every Satoshi is that in the real estate analogy, it is all beachfront property.
100%. But what does Saylor call it? He calls it digital Manhattan. It's like, there's 21 million blocks in Manhattan in cyberspace, and you've got a chance to own one of those blocks, the equivalent of owning a piece of Manhattan real estate 200 years ago, that kind of an analogy. Yeah.
And I must admit, the other thing that excites me as well is understanding that there simply isn't enough to go round, which is the nature of a scarce resource. But if you look at, and there's seems to be wildly different numbers about how many millionaires there are in the world, but there's a lot, and there is not enough Bitcoin for them all to have even one slice, or probably even half of the Bitcoin. So until they realize that, it's happy times for the rest of us who are able to get in there and to start building those stockpiles for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think I did a bit of a chat GBT search on this recently, and I think it was somewhere 65 to 70 million millionaires globally, but some of those are actually billionaires, and some are even probably heading towards trillionaires if you take into account the likes of Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, etc. But the thing is, you're spot on. With 21 million Bitcoin as a hard cap, there's not even enough whole Bitcoin to go around to service all the millionaires in the world. So it is a unique opportunity for those of us who are paying attention to this now, and also realizing that we don't have to own one whole Bitcoin. We can own and this is one of the biggest stumbling blocks for so many people, Sloan, is they look at the price of Bitcoin hovering at about 100,000 US dollars right now, just over. It's probably about 160,000 Aussie, something like that. And people go, oh, geez, I've missed it. This is too expensive. This is crazy. But you've got to remember, there's 100 million fractions of a Bitcoin called Satoshis. So you can buy into Bitcoin at $50, $500, $5,000. You can buy 500 grand, $5 million. It's very, very scalable asset. And you can't buy a piece of beachfront real estate and just decide you want to buy the back fence, right? you can't do that. So in the sense that, Bitcoin, if we kind of draw that analogy that it is digital real estate, and it is a good analogy to draw, but without insurance, without the maintenance, without the stamp duty, without the land tax, without the rates, without the potential for rule changes or property rights, if you believe in the Great Reset and you will own nothing and be happy, and what the implications might be on property rights, then Bitcoin is a life raft, because it is that asset that you and I get to own absolutely, and nobody can change it, no matter who they may be. So really interesting stuff. What I'd love to do, Sloan, just as we head towards the back end here, is I'd love to get your thoughts on the Australian landscape, like economically. What do you think is going on out there in terms of what Aussies are feeling? Do you think that most people feel like this uncertainty around the future, the cost of living crisis? How do you think all this is kind of going to just a phase that's going to blow over, or do you think things are going to get worse? What do you feel about the future for this country, and how you think about that when it comes to, say, your situation with your kids, etc.?
Yeah, look, I would love it if it was a situation that was going to blow over and improve itself
Mm,
almost without any action, but I don't see that being the case, sadly. Look, I think things are going to get more challenging. We've heard that already, as I alluded to earlier in the conversation, with the potential for the next move for interest rates to be up. So that affects almost everyone in various different ways. Mortgage holders, it's quite obvious you're going to be paying more. And if you can get ahead of that, great. But even those who are renting, we saw what happened with the increase in rents for those that were subject to that it really boosted the amount or the amount of the increase in regular rents. So it sucks up more of their life. But I think that, yeah, we have some underlying weakness in our economy. It's maybe not unique to us. We're quite resilient, and we're good at banding together, which is to our benefit. But there's some challenging times ahead. I'm not calling for Armageddon or anything like that, and I'm not an economist, but I do take an interest in the space there. I would think that we are looking at a little bit of a challenging time, definitely if we measure it in cost of living, because
mm,
those prices are not really heading in any one direction other than up.
yeah, yeah. Which does not bode well for, the future for people who don't own assets. And this is why Bitcoin is so important, because it gives everybody an opportunity to actually own some real assets, because not everybody has a spare 100K, 200K, 500K, whatever you need to go and put a deposit on a property. But everybody who puts their mind to it can find themselves $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it might be, to go and get themselves a nice bag of Satoshis, right? And this leads to the next conversation, which is for those people who say yes to Bitcoin, who say, hey, this makes sense, I want to start my journey here. It might be putting $1,000 into it and then dollar cost averaging $100 a week, or rotating capital out of some other form of assets, maybe rolling over an underperforming industry super fund. We're seeing a lot of people do that now, setting up an SMSF, and they're piling into Bitcoin inside their SMSF, which I still think is one of the lowest hanging fruit opportunities out there for Aussies,
Mm.
right? To actually deploy into Bitcoin in a really meaningful way. Is this something that you've done yourself, Sloan?
Yeah, it is. And I wish I had allowed myself the space to think about doing it earlier than I did. But
Right.
we come to these things when we come to them. And yeah, it is amazing how we can get in our own way in terms of just, I'm busy, I'll think about that later. And
Yeah.
one year can roll into another, and before we know it, we've maybe missed an uptick. We haven't
Mm,
missed the opportunity, but we've missed a little bit that we could have otherwise had. I know a number of accountants who specialise in setting up SMSFs. It is something that we're seeing a lot more. A lot is still headed in towards property, which I think sadly is a contributing factor to pushing that even further out of reach for young people. And, my eldest is 25.
mm,
Youngest is just finishing off her first year of uni. So, owning property's going to be something that is on their mind. Definitely they're playing it smart and in investing well for the future,
mm,
so that it provides them with an opportunity that doesn't come with a massive millstone around their neck in the shape of a sizable mortgage.
mm,
So it's one of those incredibly powerful things to realize you have options. And I think once people do the work and understand what is available to them with Bitcoin, for some, it means hope that they didn't have before, where all of a sudden, actually, I can take some action. And realizing that you've got a way forward can be the thing that gets people off the bench and into the game, where they will start setting aside, that $500 a month or the $250 a fortnight to regularly buy into an asset and accumulate something that they know is incredibly good quality and going to boost their economic wealth over time. So, because it's nothing more demoralizing, I think, for a young person or even a person that might be in their 30s or 40s and is still, for various reasons, trying to get onto the property ladder or maybe get back on again, perhaps after a relationship breakdown, then feeling like you're stuck and that you don't have some viable options that are going to have a good ending. So it's definitely one of the things that people should be considering as part of their mix as to how they go about establishing themselves. There is no one right answer for every individual circumstances, but there is only one pristine asset like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's, it's so true that Bitcoin is hope. And I actually mentioned, I think in my YouTube video today that, I couldn't imagine a world for myself personally, having been 7 years down this rabbit hole where Bitcoin didn't exist, and not even so much for me, but for so many people who I know Bitcoin has attracted, for the fact that this is really an opportunity for them that they would never have otherwise had inside the legacy system. And one thing has led to another, and many people have been able to really build really positive lives out of Bitcoin in various ways.
what came to mind as you were saying that is the realization that I've had for a while now is that, stress seems, or financial stress starts to evaporate the more we get down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and the more we feel comfortable with it as an asset. Yes, it's volatile, but we know where we're going, and it just makes the future that much brighter, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think it just gives you this blue sky in front of you where no matter what happens now, if you've got Bitcoin and you've got it secured, right, in the right way, self-custody, and you're playing the long game, no matter what happens in the short term, there is this inner sense that things are going to work out fine. They're going to work out great in the long run. And just on that point, Sloan, I want to just get your thoughts on, for those people who are in Bitcoin right now and who maybe dabbled a little bit, or maybe they've got their Bitcoin still sitting on an exchange or with a counterparty or whatever it might be, how important do you think it is to be your own bank with Bitcoin, to take it into self-custody? I know you've been on a bit of a journey recently with Tony and the team at the Bitcoin Way.
Yep.
Yeah, just speak to your experience with that and why you think self-custody is so crucial.
Well, first, before I jumped in there, couldn't recommend Tony and the team at the Bitcoin Way more highly. They are such a fantastic group of people, and really how I feel ultimately after doing some work with them is empowered. So I think there's two sides to that self-custody journey. One is that sense of optimism and control, that you know things are covered, and that you have the mindset that comes with incredible peace of mind. It's no longer the external risk of the exchange that is going to cause you an issue, provided that you are aware of what you're doing and you have your systems and processes in place with, and of course, organizations like Tony at the Bitcoin Way make sure that happens. It's really
Peace
is.
of mind.
Yeah, it is peace of mind, and I love the term being your own bank. It's a term that I've used, actually not in that context. I've used it in other contexts where I'm trying to keep people away from the average consumer type debt. So having resources available of your own to draw upon, the classic rainy day fund or emergency savings, whatever you call it, that means that you're operating as your own bank. Because otherwise, when you have an emergency crop up, you got to reach for a debt solution, which traps you more and more in the old system. And where I'm about sort of actually helping people set themselves free by freeing up additional capital that they can make good intentional choices with each and every month about how it's like laying down your own highway to where you'd rather be each and every month with the financial decisions that you're making. And Bitcoin's the opportunity for that to be a super highway rather than just a rough goat track.
I love that. Awesome stuff. Sloan, it's been really good talking to you, mate. I'd love to finish with where you see the future for Bitcoin? Do you ever think about where this could be in, say, 5 years, or any type of inflection point where this gains serious mass adoption? What do you think's coming in the next, say, 5 to 10 years for Bitcoin?
Yeah, look, I think we see adoption growing each and every day, and it has pockets around the world, and things such as the Lightning system allows that to morph into the everyday transactions. So it does become feasible to pay for a coffee in Bitcoin when you're using the Lightning payment system. And I watched some really inspiring videos of what they're doing in South Africa with
Mm,
a few communities there, and just bringing the community along with them, getting all the shop owners involved is just incredibly exciting. And for those people, it's actually getting them involved and having a financial future, where before it was really just hand to mouth, and
yeah.
they've
So
got the
now they're
capacity to go so
empowered.
much further.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. They're financially empowered, and this is the interesting thing. It's these suppressed economies and
Mm.
populations of the world that are really front running this
Yep.
adoption, because they're going, well, hold on a minute, we can't rely on the system anymore. The system's knocked us out for the longest time, and now we've got an option to just be peer-to-peer value transfer, and they're loving it. It's fascinating to watch that. I'm glad you saw that. It's brilliant
Yeah.
stuff, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, it's incredible. And for a lot of people, they've been systematically excluded from
yeah.
what even was
Banking
the
and
old banking system. They just haven't had access to that, and most of the
mm,
time sort of on purpose, or they weren't deemed to be valuable enough as a collective to make it worth the institution's while. Um, you know, hard-nosed economics does come into it, but it's sad to see when that's the case. And
mm,
the other thing, there's just so many use cases for this, and you hear people sort of saying, "Oh, but what can you do with it?" And it's almost like, what can you not do with it? The whole remittance system around the world, with people working abroad to help improve their own futures and send money back home, the fees on that are enormous, and so there's entire businesses that are built around sending money across the world in that fashion that are simply going to disappear unless they morph in and start using this technology, which will take it from, in some cases, ridiculous figures like 20 to 25% of what is being sent home gets absorbed in fees. So you 3/4 is all that your family receives if you're sending that home,
yeah, yeah,
versus a dollar or two for you to take that middleman out of it and send that via the Lightning network, and your family gets the full value of that. What's that going to do for people's lives? It's just incredible. But of course, the Bitcoin blockchains of, I think, ultimately going to be reserved for those very large international type transactions between large entities, large companies, where you do need to send very securely without anyone getting in the way large amounts. And you know
UTXOs, yeah,
yeah,
on chain, yeah, yeah,
and if that happens within 10 minutes, that's fantastic, compared to several days or a week in the traditional
yeah,
system there, and
yeah.
a fraction of the cost. So yeah, there's just everywhere you look, and who knows what's going to be built on as other layer 2 or layer 3 opportunities.
Yeah. No, I think watch this space. It's a very, very exciting future for those who are A, learning about Bitcoin, B, stacking sats, as we say. And so, Sloan, I love the work you're doing. I love the fact that you're empowering people to improve their financial lives. I think that's a much needed service in the community. I love the fact that you're a Bitcoiner, not just a Bitcoiner, but you've become a really hardcore Bitcoiner. You understand self-custody. You're helping to spread the message. So I really appreciate your time. Just to finish off here, Sloan, I want to hand the mic over to you. Anything you want to leave the audience with today?
Look, I think that the message is absolutely one of hope and progress. Stay curious. If you are listening to a conversation like this or others, and some of it seems a little bit technical, or you wonder why you would say that the existing money system is broken, there's lots of great resources that you can jump out there and absorb. So learn more, take on that education, because knowledge absolutely is power. And in this case, it's actually future security for you and your family to get that knowledge. Other than that, mate, I would just sort of say, if people want to find me, they can do so on the world of LinkedIn, but also Instagram as well. And as much as I love working with regular folk who are professionals and business owners, I also love working with Bitcoiners, and I've got a special particular program for supporting people, because even the best Bitcoiners, we're all wired the same biologically. And as I said before, sometimes we get in our own way. And so the choices that we make with how we're handling our fiat can hold us up from making the transition on a smoother and speedier way towards that bright Bitcoin future. So that's what a lot of people do, thinking about their overall circumstances, but extract themselves as quickly as they possibly can towards that brighter future.
Awesome stuff. Well, mate, we'll leave the links to your socials and your website down below. So if anybody would like to connect with Sloan, you'll be able to find him below in the show notes. Mate, I really appreciate your time. I think the audience will have gained a lot of value out of today. I know I got some really great insight. And also thank you for being a part of my community as well. I know you've added some really great value to the members inside the Bitcoin Success Circle, and it's a community that continues to flourish and grow and thrive, and a lot of people are on the path, and I think that's a really powerful thing, really exciting. Sloan
Thanks,
Wilkins,
mate.
thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Please like, share and subscribe, and thanks so much. We'll see you in the next one.